Friends, this is the story of a woman who disobeyed her Lord. Instead of engaging in worship during the month of Ramadan, she indulged in luxury. She had no fear of her Lord and didn't care about her family. She disobeyed her husband, who was a pious and virtuous man, and as a result, he faced humiliation everywhere. But the woman remained lost in the allure of worldly pleasures. Whenever her husband recited the Holy Quran, she would sit and play songs on her phone. While everyone else was fasting, she would sit down to eat in front of them, even trying to persuade others to break their fasts. Then, Allah gave her such a punishment that she became incapable of facing anyone. Whenever she removed her veil, people would run away upon seeing her. Friends, what did she do that led Allah to send such a great punishment upon her? Let us hear the rest of the story. The soft morning light was filtering through the curtains and spreading across the room. The chirping of birds made the atmosphere even more pleasant. On one side, the sweet sound of Quranic recitation echoed, while on the other side, the noise of the phone broke the silence. Sidra quickly picked up the phone and, upon seeing the screen, smiled. "Here, Mom, your friend has sent the link to the new movie." Rukhsana, who was half laying on the bed, glanced at the phone and said, "Let your father and sister focus on their Quran and prayers. We will enjoy ourselves." She often involved Sidra in such activities. It was a routine for them. Hamid, Rukhsana's husband, was a pious and righteous man. He had always made religion the center of his life. His two daughters, Sidra and Hafsa, followed their father's example. They prayed daily, fasted, and sat with their father to recite the Quran. Rukhsana, however, had no interest in these things. One day, Hamid performed ablution and offered the tahajjud prayers. His daughters were also awake. Every morning, they would pray far with their father and then recite the Quran for a while. "Dad, which surah shall we memorize today?" Hafsa asked with a smile. "Today, we will memorize the verses from Surah Yasin. It is a surah that brings peace to the hearts," Hamid answered gently. There was a sense of tranquility and radiance in the environment, but this scene held no significance for Rukhsana. She was sitting in front of the TV with a cup of tea, engrossed in watching a drama early in the morning. Rukhsana's life revolved around entertainment. She considered prayers, fasting, and the Quran to be meaningless. She often taunted Hamid and her daughters, saying, "What's the use of all this worship? The world is meant to be enjoyed." Hamid would ignore her remarks. He knew that guiding her was in Allah's hands. He tried to explain gently and with kindness, but Rukhsana's state was deteriorating day by day. She loved movies, songs, social media, and idle gossip. Whenever Hamid was reciting the Quran, she would turn up the volume of music on her phone. She did not like peace. The daughters had tried many times to explain to their mother, "Mom, you should also pray with Dad. It will bring peace to your heart." "Ah, my dear, my heart is always happy. I cannot be confined to worship. All of this is just your father's way of thinking. You should not follow him too much, or you will lose the joy of life." One day, Rukhsana was half laying on the soft, plush couch. She had her phone in her hand, and the glow of the screen reflected in her eyes. The room was dimly lit, and a soft background music filled the atmosphere. A famous drama was playing on the TV, in which the heroine was arguing with her mother. Rukhsana laughed aloud and shook her head, saying, "Exactly right. Today's girls should make their own decisions. Gone are the days when they had to listen to their parents." At that moment, Sidra and Hafsa entered the room. Both of them wore headscarves, holding the Quran in their hands, with a special spiritual peace visible on their faces. "Mom, why don't you join us in reciting the Quran today?" Sidra said lovingly. Rukhsana put her phone aside with a laugh and sarcastically replied, "My dear, I find all this boring. And what's the need for you to always immerse yourselves in Quran and prayers?" Hafsa looked at her mother in surprise and said, "Mom, it's the month of Ramadan. We should be increasing our acts of worship so that Allah becomes pleased with us." Rukhsana sighed deeply and paused for a moment. Then, in a soft voice, she said, "My dear, don't you think your life has become very limited? Only prayer, fasting, and the Quran, nothing else. Have you ever thought about how much there is in the world outside? You should enjoy life too." Sidra looked at her mother and replied, "Mom, the real joy of life is in getting closer to Allah, not in worldly pleasures." Rukhsana was very beautiful. Hamid had married her with her mother's consent. Hamid's business wasn't doing well, but they managed to get by. He was a 5-time prayer man and a righteous person. On the other hand, Rukhsana had no connection to religion at all. Allah had blessed them with 2 daughters, but Rukhsana didn't feel any love for her daughters. She remained absorbed in her own world, shopping, buying new clothes, doing makeup, and listening to songs on her phone. These were the only things she did. Meanwhile, Hamid would come home tired from work, but he still took care of his daughters and looked after them. This is why Sidra and Hafsa had become like their father. They were both devoted to prayer, reciting the Quran, and fasting during Ramadan, just like their father. But Rukhsana had none of these habits. She neither prayed, nor recited the Quran, nor fasted during Ramadan. One day, Rukhsana said to her daughters, "Look outside the window. What are girls your age doing? They go to college, party, hang out with friends, wear beautiful clothes, listen to music, and watch movies. And you too. You just sit with the Quran." Hafsa looked at her mother softly and said, "Mom, we also want to live life well. But not in this way. The joys of this world are temporary. We seek eternal happiness, which is found in the pleasure of Allah." Rukhsana laughed. "Pleasure of Allah? My dear, Allah created us to live happily. He did not create us to be hard on ourselves." Sidra said in a slightly stern tone, "Mom, just think for a moment. If we don't worship in the month of Ramadan, then when will we?" Rukhsana softened her tone and placed her hand on her daughter's shoulders. "Look, my dear, I'm not against you. I just want you to enjoy life as well. Fasting is good, but is it necessary to fast every single day? Sometimes, it's okay to skip it. Otherwise, the body gets weak. And prayers? What do you gain by praying so much? You should also maintain some balance." Hafsa shook her head in disagreement. "Mom, do you know that in Ramadan, the reward for a single obligatory act is 70 times greater? Whoever fasts, Allah opens the gates of heaven for them." Rukhsana waved her hand in frustration and said, "These are all things the clerics say, my dear. People in this world are looking for ways to stay happy, and you are making life harder for yourselves. Okay, tell me this, if one of your friends has a birthday and it happens to be the same day as your fast, what will you do?" Sidra answered with determination, "I will fast, because this worldly happiness is only for a few hours, whereas the pleasure of Allah is eternal." Rukhsana smiled forcefully and nodded. "Fine, do as you wish. But remember, you can't live your life too rigidly." The 2 daughters looked at each other. They knew that their mother would never understand them, but they also knew that they had to keep their path firm on their own. Rukhsana tried many times to lead them astray, but their hearts were illuminated by the light of faith. They didn't fall for her words. And this was the difference. On one side there was light, and on the other, there was darkness. In Hamid's house, there was an unusual tension. The month of Ramadan was a time of mercy and blessings, but in this house, Satan was working his schemes. Rukhsana's irreligiosity, her disobedience, and her attempts to lead her daughters astray had created an atmosphere of tension. Sidra and Hafsa were both fasting. They spent their days reciting the Quran, praying, and trying to help their mother with preparing for iftar. However, Rukhsana found all of their actions to be repellent. She wanted her daughters to indulge in worldly pleasures just as she did and stay away from worship. Today, it was the same. Sidra and Hafsa had prayed the Dur prayer and went to their room to rest. Suddenly, they heard the sound of dishes coming from the kitchen. Hafsa raised her head. Mom, what is she doing in the kitchen? Sidra also looked toward the door, surprised. Let's go check. The two sisters quietly tiptoed toward the kitchen. When they opened the door, their eyes widened in surprise. Rukhsana was sitting at the dining table, enjoying a plate of biryani. There was a glass of cold drink in front of her, and she was eating with a spoon, putting the rice into her mouth. Mom, Hafsa said, uncertainly. At that moment, Rukhsana turned the plate towards Hafsa. Here, you eat too. What are you doing? Rukhsana shrugged carelessly while chewing the rice. It's mealtime, I'm eating. Sidra said, with sadness and anger. But Mom, it's Ramadan. At least don't eat in front of us. Rukhsana replied sarcastically. Oh wow, now you all are going to tell me when to eat? I'm not a child, and I don't follow these pointless restrictions like you do. Hafsa said anxiously. Mom, these are not restrictions, they are Allah's commands. Rukhsana, in anger, slammed the spoon on the table. Enough. I've told you. I don't want to hear your lectures. You both eat with me. Why are you making things so hard on yourselves for no reason? Sidra looked at her mother in shock. Mom, you are forcing us to sin. Rukhsana rolled her eyes and said, Sin, righteousness, these are all words your father taught you. Enjoy life, sit with me, and eat. Tears welled up in Hafsa's eyes. Mom, you know that in Ramadan, Satan is locked up. But those who follow Satan, they become Satan themselves. Rukhsana's face hardened for a moment. Rukhsana slapped Hafsa hard across the face. The poor girl's eyes filled with tears. Rukhsana said, You both have talked too much. If you don't want to eat, then don't. But don't interfere with my life. Go, get out of here. Rukhsana yelled in anger. When Hamid came home in the evening, he noticed the sadness on his daughters' faces. What happened? Why do both of you look so upset? Hafsa hesitated before speaking. Abu, Mom is forcing us to break our fast. Hamid's heart sank. Did Rukhsana say that? Sidra nodded. Yes, Abu, and she eats in front of us too. She's trying to make us do the same. Hamid's eyes filled with sorrow and anger at once. He went straight to Rukhsana, who was sitting in front of the TV, drinking tea. Rukhsana, what is all this? Rukhsana rolled her eyes and, with a look of disdain, said, What happened? What new complaint do you have now? Hamid said in a stern tone, Is it true that you are forcing Sidra and Hafsa to break their fast? Rukhsana replied sarcastically, Yes, what's wrong with that? These girls are wasting the precious years of their lives. I want them to see the colors of this world too, not just waste their time in prayers. Hamid said angrily, Rukhsana, respect Ramadan. It will brighten your hereafter. Rukhsana waved her hand carelessly. Forget all that. Come, sit down. I've made biryani. It's delicious. I'll bring some for you. Hamid looked at Rukhsana in disbelief. I'm fasting. Rukhsana smiled and said, So what? Break your fast. What's the worst that will happen? The sky won't fall. Hamid's heart felt as if a dagger had struck it. Rukhsana, do you even realize what you are saying? This is a sin. Rukhsana replied, These are old things, Hamid. Make life easier and live according to your own wishes. This was Rukhsana's extreme defiance. Not only had she gone astray herself, but she was also forcing her husband and daughters to sin. Sidra and Hafsa prayed to Allah with tears in their eyes. O Allah, guide our mother, or save us from this trial. Hamid took a deep breath and said, Rukhsana, remember that Allah is watching everything. What you are doing will have a very bad ending. Rukhsana took a sip of tea and said, We'll see. As soon as she spoke those words, the tea she had been drinking went down the wrong way. She began coughing violently. Her face turned red. Hamid and the daughters rushed to her, but as soon as they touched her, a chilling shiver ran through their bodies. Strange marks appeared on her skin. A look of terror appeared in her eyes. She herself was shocked by what was happening to her body. What is happening to me? Rukhsana screamed. Hamid and the daughters started reciting Quranic verses. Rukhsana clasped her ears tightly and shouted, "Stop! Don't make me hear it." But the light of the Quran was illuminating the darkness of her misguidance. Rukhsana's screams grew louder as her body went through an eerie transformation. It was a moment of reckoning. A woman who had chased her desires, mocked the religion, disrespected Ramadan, was now facing Allah's wrath. Hamid and his daughters continued reciting the Quran. Then, suddenly, Rukhsana stopped coughing, and gradually, she started to get better. When the daughters saw their mother in this state, they were deeply worried. Looking at their father, Sidra said, "Abu, do something for Mom. Talk to her. Help her understand that she needs to leave this world behind and turn to the faith." One day, Sidra and Hafsa began preparing for iftar while Hamid sat, troubled by Rukhsana's behavior. He knew she was distant from religion, but now she had gone too far. For the past several years, Rukhsana had stayed away from prayer and fasting herself, but now, she was creating an atmosphere at home where both the daughters and Hamid felt uneasy. Sometimes, she would play loud music during the day. Other times, she would eat and drink in front of everyone. And at times, she would laugh at her daughters for wasting time in what she called pointless worship. Today, Hamid decided that he would try once again to talk to Rukhsana. He knew she was very stubborn, but he couldn't leave her in this state of misguidance. Before iftar, when Rukhsana was making curry in the kitchen, Hamid went to her and spoke in a gentle tone. "Rukhsana, I need to talk to you about something important." Rukhsana, carelessly stirring the curry, said, "Yeah, go ahead, what is it now? Are you going to start giving me advice again?" Hamid restrained himself and spoke softly. "Rukhsana, this is Ramadan, Allah's month, the month of blessings and mercy. Don't waste this opportunity. Look, we are all human, and we make mistakes, but Allah is the most forgiving. If you repent today, Allah will forgive you." Rukhsana looked at Hamid with anger. "Hamid, why do you keep telling me this over and over? Every day, the same thing. The same lecture. Leave me alone. I have no interest in all of this." Hamid took a deep breath. "Rukhsana, you know that I am trying to advise you gently because I cannot bear to see you burning in the fire of hell. You are my wife, the mother of my daughters. I love you, and I want you to choose the path that leads us to paradise." Rukhsana replied sarcastically, "Paradise? Hamid, right now I just want the happiness of this world. I don't want to live like a prisoner, like you and your daughters are living. If you want to fast, fast. If you want to pray, pray. But don't force me." Hamid said with pain, "I am not forcing you. I am just trying to make you understand that this world is temporary. After it, we will have to stand before Allah. And if you continue to disrespect Ramadan, the consequences will be severe." Rukhsana snapped. "So what? What will happen? Will lightning strike me? Will the earth split open? Stop scaring me, Hamid. These are all old stories." Hamid felt as though someone had struck his heart. His own wife, the one he had spent his life with, had become so selfish that she no longer cared about the hereafter. Rukhsana's behavior was no longer confined to the house. Even the neighbors had become fed up with her. The women of the neighborhood would often warn her to respect Ramadan, but she would just laugh and dismiss their words. One day, when Sidra and Hafsa went to the neighborhood for a Quran recitation, they returned to find several women standing at the door with serious expressions on their faces. "Tell your mother to listen to us," an elderly woman said. "The whole neighborhood is busy with Ramadan worship, but she keeps playing loud music all day. It disturbs everyone. She eats and drinks in front of everyone and even tries to mislead others. Hafsa's eyes filled with embarrassment. Aunt, we are also very upset. Abu has tried to explain to her many times, but she refuses to listen. This is not a trivial matter, another woman said. If she doesn't change, the neighbors will stop visiting this house. Hearing this, Rukhsana appeared at the door. As if I care about any of you. You can't tolerate me because I don't participate in your false piety. The elderly woman shook her head sadly. Child, we don't wish you harm, but don't mock Allah's commands. Remember, the consequences will be dire. Rukhsana laughed. We'll see. That night, Hamid decided that he would try one last time to talk to Rukhsana. He went to her while she was on the phone talking to a friend. Rukhsana, I need to speak to you one more time. Rukhsana put the phone aside. Now you're going to start with the same old stories again. Hamid said seriously, No, this time I've come to give you a final warning. If you don't change your ways, I will no longer tolerate you in this house. Rukhsana narrowed her eyes. Oh, now you're threatening to kick me out of the house? Hamid said firmly, This house will run according to Allah's commandments. If you refuse to follow them, you will have to decide where you want to live. You can leave if you want. Rukhsana glanced at her husband. Try to throw me out, and then see what I do. Hamid, controlling his anger, said, I will pray that Allah guides you. But if you remain like this, remember, Allah's punishment is very near. Rukhsana wanted exactly this. It only took Hamid's words for her to leave the house. Along with that, she was insulting Hamid, saying, I am the most beautiful woman in the whole village. I can go anywhere I want. Be thankful that I've spent so much time with you, a poor man. What have you ever given me in life? As soon as Hamid heard this, his eyes widened in astonishment. Sidra and Hafsa also started looking at their mother. Mom, what are you saying? The respect and honor you have in this whole village is only because of Abu. Otherwise, with your behavior, no one could have tolerated you. But Rukhsana gathered her necessary belongings and began to leave the house. Hamid stepped in front of her and said, Don't do this. If you don't care about me, at least think about your daughters. He had managed to convince Rukhsana with great difficulty. Then the greedy woman agreed that she would take the money Hamid had, and she would go for a lot of shopping because Eid was approaching. Hamid agreed. He had taken care of his wife beyond his means. Today, he took out a lot of money and gave it to his wife, even though he knew how hard he had worked to earn it. Some of this money was meant for his daughter's things, but for now, he didn't want to upset his wife. The next day, Rukhsana went to the market. The first thing she did was buy a beautiful and expensive suit for herself. She was chatting happily with the shopkeeper. After she was done with the clothes, she went to a shop selling bangles. She seemed very happy as she was looking at different bangles. Eventually, she found bangles that matched her clothes. The shopkeeper was being very friendly with her, and Rukhsana smiled at him. She handed him the bangles and said, You wear them for me. At that moment, an elderly man from their neighborhood was passing by. When he saw this, he became very angry. This is Hamid's wife. Look at her, she has no shame. Her husband prays 5 times a day and is a righteous man, and here she is, laughing and holding hands with other men. He began to scold her harshly. The old man then went to Hamid and told him, Why don't you keep your wife at home? Why do you send her to the market alone? Sidra and Hafsa had been listening to all of this, and they were both worried, not knowing what was going on. The elderly man continued, Hamid, I'm warning you. After today, do not send your wife to the market alone. When the old man left, Rukhsana returned home and happily began showing Hamid her shopping. Hamid didn't tell her about the old man's comments because just the day before, he had managed to convince Rukhsana with great difficulty. Hamid then asked, Did you buy anything for your daughters? She looked at her daughters with disdain and said, Why should I buy anything for them? They are your daughters. They only listen to you. Whatever you want to buy for them, you can get it yourself. Hearing this, Sidra and Hafsa were deeply hurt. This was their own mother, who didn't care about her daughters at all. There was still time before iftar. Rukhsana took some meat out of the fridge, heated it up, and sat down to eat. Whenever Rukhsana passed by the Chaudhary's mansion, she often used to think to herself, How beautiful I am. If only Chaudhary had married me, I would be living in luxury today. Chaudhary Sajid was a pleasure-seeking man, but his wife was very refined. She had also seen Rukhsana passing by in the neighborhood, and once, she even complimented her. Wow, Majid is really lucky. Rukhsana had looked at her in surprise, and the woman said, I can tell just by looking at you, you are very beautiful. Ever since Chaudhary Sajid had complimented her, Rukhsana often found herself thinking about him. It was the last 10 days of Ramadan when there was a Quran recitation at the mansion. Usually, Rukhsana didn't go anywhere, only her daughters went. But since it was at the mansion, she said, I'll go myself. She had just reached the door when she ran into Chaudhary Sajid. He grabbed Rukhsana's arm and said, You should talk to us sometimes. We are always longing to see you from afar. Rukhsana's eyes suddenly lit up. Chaudhary Sajid is right, she thought. Then he said, Why would I lie? Rukhsana quickly gave him her phone number. She was very happy that day and smiled for a long time when she got home. That night, after iftar, when Hamid and Rukhsana's daughters were busy in worship, Rukhsana secretly called Chaudhary Sajid and began talking to him. Slowly, this became a daily routine. Every time her husband and daughters were praying, Rukhsana would quietly go to her room and start talking to Chaudhary Sajid. Hamid was also surprised that Rukhsana wasn't bothering him lately. Normally, she would disturb them during their prayer time by either turning on a loud TV drama or playing loud music on her phone. Sajid was very happy. His wife was not bad either, but he had been eyeing Rukhsana for a long time. Whenever he saw her going here and there, he could not stop himself from looking. If only I could meet her once, Chaudhary said maliciously. Sajid was not handsome. He had dark skin, a heavy body, and rugged features. However, Rukhsana liked his house and money. One day, while Rukhsana and Sajid were talking on the phone, Chaudhary said to her, Rukhsana, you should meet me sometime. I want to see you. She hesitated and said, Where can I meet you? I have daughters at home. Eid was approaching, and one day, Hamid decided to buy some things for the girls. He took his daughters to the market so they could pick out clothes and bangles of their choice. Rukhsana immediately called Chaudhary Sajid and invited him over to her house. He stayed at Hamid's house for quite a while. When he left, a woman from the neighborhood saw him. A few days later, the same thing happened again. Hamid was at work, and Sidra and Hafsa had gone to a friend's house. That's when Rukhsana invited Chaudhary Sajid to her house. The same woman saw him again and spread the news throughout the neighborhood. Everyone in the neighborhood began criticizing her, saying, How can she, the wife of a righteous man, do such a thing? When this news spread, Rukhsana became furious. Yes, tell me, what have I done? The woman said, You are being disloyal to your husband. When Rukhsana saw that the news had reached the whole neighborhood, she lost control of her emotions. Meanwhile, when Hamid returned from work, he was shocked to see what had happened. 3 or 4 women were in his house, and they were saying harsh things about Rukhsana. Her daughters were standing on one side, crying. As soon as Hamid entered the house, Sidra and Hafsa ran towards him and hugged him. Abu, look. These women are talking badly about Mom. Hamid asked, What happened? One of the women said, Ask your wife. Every time you leave the house, she calls Chaudhary Sajid over. Hamid felt as if the ground had slipped from beneath his feet. He became very worried and looked at Rukhsana. He couldn't believe it. His wife could do something like this. Not praying, Not fasting, that was one thing. But he never imagined she could do something like this with another man. He looked at Rukhsana, whose forehead was furrowed. She angrily looked at Hamid and said, "I have no interest in staying with you. I am leaving." She picked up her phone and some essentials and left the house. On her way, she called Chaudhry Sajid, who was very happy, and said, "There's no need to come to the mansion. I'll take you to the farm." He took her to his farm. "I haven't even been divorced yet. How can I live with you?" But Sajid said, "Don't worry. I'll send the divorce notice." Sidra and Hafsa were devastated. They couldn't believe that their mother could do something like this. But Hamid tried to console them. "My dear, from your childhood until now, I've raised you both. Your mother has never even looked at you lovingly. This was our destiny." The neighbors were talking about the situation in different ways, but the news hadn't reached the mansion yet that Rukhsana had left the house. Chaudhry Sajid's son had a very strict temperament, and if he found out, he would have killed Rukhsana in a second. Still, the neighbors were trying to console Hamid, saying, "Well, it's good she left. She never gave you any peace in your life." They felt sorry for Hamid. Hamid, though deeply saddened, was showing strength because he had to take care of his daughters. Meanwhile, Rukhsana, who was happily living at the farm, always had Chaudhry Sajid by her side. She had been living with him at the farm for 3 days without marriage. Chaudhry Sajid constantly praised her, and she enjoyed the attention. One night, Chaudhry Sajid had to go to the mansion. He left at 1 o'clock in the night. His son was away in the city at that time. While he was at the mansion, Rukhsana was very happy. She took out her special cream, the one she used for removing wrinkles, and started applying it. She applied the cream to look younger and went to sleep. But when she woke up in the morning, she was shocked to see that she had grown thick, coarse hair on her face. The hair was so large, it looked like she had the face of an animal. When she tried to speak, her voice wouldn't come out. After trying hard, when she finally managed to speak, it felt like the sound coming from her throat was that of a dog. She panicked, thinking, "What is happening to me?" She quickly grabbed her scarf and covered her face. As soon as Chaudhry Sajid arrived, Rukhsana, who was veiled, was trying to hide her face. He approached her and began to pull off her veil. "Are you even going to cover your face from me now?" he said. But she tightly gripped her scarf. When Chaudhry Sajid forcefully removed her scarf, he was shocked to see her face, which looked so hideous, it resembled that of a dog. He screamed loudly and stepped back in horror. "Get out of here!" he yelled, pushing her out of the house. She stumbled out onto the road. As she walked, she felt more black hair growing on her arms and hands. She panicked, feeling thirsty, and stopped by a street vendor who had just set up his drink stall. As soon as she started drinking the water, she removed her veil. People nearby saw her and immediately dropped their glasses, running away in fear. Some people even picked up stones and started throwing them at her. Panic spread among the crowd. Many people were throwing stones, and everyone's tongue was filled with "Astaghfirullah, God forgive us." The people said, "This woman denied the worship of Allah, betrayed her pious and righteous husband, betrayed her daughters, and even mocked Allah's worship. She got the punishment she deserved. This is the wrath of Allah. She has turned from a human to a beast."